Most people picture fallen angels as free-roaming demons wandering through the world, tempting human beings without any restriction whatsoever. The truth is something else entirely. A specific group of those beings is chained at this very moment in absolute darkness under divine custody for millennia. And what they did to earn this exclusive imprisonment defies every ordinary religious expectation. This is the story no one told you. Consider the situation for a moment. There are two distinct groups of fallen angels according to the biblical record. One of them continues acting, influencing, whispering, according to Christian tradition. The other is locked away. No light, no movement, no voice, waiting for a marked date that no one has yet seen arrive. The Apostle Peter wrote about this imprisonment with words so precise that he chose a Greek term found nowhere else in the New Testament. And the Apostle Jude confirmed everything, adding details that completely transform the way you understand what happened before the flood. Put this in historical perspective. The text of 2 Peter chapter 2 verse 4 is direct. God did not spare the angels who sinned. He cast them into chains of darkness. He reserved them for judgment. Jude, in his verse 6, reinforces the same point and adds a decisive piece of information. These angels did not keep their own domain. They abandoned their proper dwelling, and for that reason they are held in eternal chains under darkness until the judgment of the great day. The word Peter used in the original Greek is tartarou. It comes from Tartarus. And here emerges the first detail that changes everything. Tartarus is not the same place as Hades, nor the same place as Gehenna. In ancient cosmology, Tartarus was the deepest region, beneath the underworld itself, reserved for powerful entities that dared to defy the divine order. Peter took that cultural term and applied it to the concrete destination of specific angelic beings. It was not metaphor, it was a designation of place. And that is where the real theological problem began. Why were only some angels chained, while others, according to the same tradition, remain active in the world? The answer is found in Genesis chapter 6. The text describes an event that for centuries has puzzled exegetes, theologians, and historians. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful. They took for themselves whichever ones they chose. And from that union came the Nephilim, giants, men of renown, beings who, according to the biblical record, corrupted the human lineage so gravely that they provoked the divine decision to destroy all flesh upon the earth. Consider the scene before the flood. Some demographic reconstructions built on pre-flood lifespans exceeding 900 years suggest the earth held between 400 and 700 million inhabitants when the waters came. Other estimates, more conservative, place the figure around 200 million. And amid that vast human population, a spiritual corruption without precedent was spreading. It was not merely violence. It was not merely idolatry. It was a mingling of the material and the angelic that, according to the biblical text, led God to regret having made man. Most people think of the flood as punishment for human wickedness in isolation. But a careful reading of Genesis 6 reveals another engine behind the divine decision. It was the transgression of the angels themselves that initiated the contamination. It was the abandonment of their celestial dwelling that opened the door to the deformation of humanity. And it was for that reason that these beings received a separate, unique, and immediate judgment: silence. The other fallen angels, according to classical Christian tradition, were cast down with Lucifer in the primordial events. Those continued with limited freedom. They tempted, they attacked, they possessed. But the angels of Genesis 6 did something different. They crossed a boundary that not even the others had dared to cross. They left their own dimension. They took physical form. They fathered offspring. And that hybrid offspring threatened the very continuity of the messianic lineage that God had promised in Genesis 3, verse 15. Grasp the magnitude of the offense. This was not merely rebellion against God, it was direct sabotage of the plan of redemption. If all of humanity were contaminated with fallen angelic blood, there would no longer be a pure descendant of the woman's seed to crush the serpent's head. The very mechanism of salvation would be rendered useless before it had even begun. And it was for that reason, according to this reading, that God responded with two simultaneous measures. He destroyed the corrupted humanity through the flood, and he chained the angels responsible for the event. Then comes another historically fascinating detail. The Book of Enoch, though it does not belong to the biblical canon accepted by most Christian churches, was widely known in Second Temple Judaism and appears to have been read by the apostles themselves. Jude, in his verse 14, directly quotes a prophecy attributed to Enoch, and chapters 6 through 16 of the Book of Enoch describe in specific detail the event of Genesis 6. They speak of 200 angels called Watchers who descended upon Mount Hermon. They name their leaders, such as Semjaza and Azazel. They describe the divine judgment that chained them in the depths until the great day. These parallels do not make Enoch inspired, but they show that ancient Jewish tradition preserved a coherent memory of the event. And when Peter and Jude wrote, they engaged with that shared tradition to clarify for their readers that the imprisonment of the angels was an established fact within biblical faith. On the surface, Peter's account appears brief, but beneath it every chosen word carries technical density. Peter wrote, Seirais Zophu, chains of darkness, not ordinary darkness. Zophos is a thick, profoundly somber darkness, associated in Greek literature with the deepest realm of the dead. And those chains were not presented as metaphor. The text describes real immobilization, in a real location, under real divine guard. Jude adds the expression idioi des moi, meaning eternal chains, or chains enduring until the appointed time. The linguistic precision is deliberate. These angels are not imprisoned forever in the absolute sense. They are imprisoned until the judgment of the great day, meaning there is a temporal marker. There is a foreseen moment when those chains will be broken and their prisoners delivered to final judgment, and that is only the beginning of what this reveals. Consider the precision of the word chosen. Peter, by using Tartaru, engaged directly with the Hellenistic culture of the first century. Greek readers knew exactly what that term evoked. In Hesiod, Tartarus was described as so far removed from the world of the living that a bronze anvil would fall for 9 days before reaching it. It was the prison of the Titans, defeated by the Olympian gods. Peter took that cultural reference and applied it to the fate of the biblical Watchers. The message was unmistakable to every listener. These beings were locked in the deepest, most isolated, most inescapable level of created existence. Calculate the duration. The flood is estimated to have occurred between 4,000 and 4,500 years before the present era, according to traditional biblical chronologies. Some reconstructions, based on the Masoretic texts, place the event around 2,450 years before Christ. Others, based on the Septuagint, push it back to more than 3,000 years before. In any case, these angels have been chained for at least 1,200 generations of human beings, in silence, without action, without influence over the world of the living, locked away by a divine decision that admitted no appeal. That single detail transforms the understanding of biblical spirituality. Most people imagine the invisible world as an open field where all fallen angelic beings compete freely for the human soul. The reality described by Peter and Jude is different. There are prisoners. There are sentences being served. There is a judicial order in force. And that order was imposed by God in a manner that was public, recorded, and communicated to subsequent generations. Observe the scene the biblical text allows us to reconstruct. Before the flood, the earth had become a grotesque hybrid. Giants roamed the plains. Entire cities gave themselves over to violent practices. The relationship between humans and fallen angelic beings had produced a culture of fear, brute force, and domination. The Nephilim, according to Genesis 6 verse 4, were men of renown, which means, in the ancient context, warrior leaders, powerful figures, possibly venerated as demigods. The later mythologies of various ancient civilizations, with their stories of heroes born from unions between gods and mortal women, perhaps preserve distorted echoes of those pre-flood events. Follow the scale of the corruption. When Moses wrote about the sons of Anak in Numbers 13, verse 33, recording that the spies said they appeared as grasshoppers in comparison to them, he explicitly used the term Nephilim, suggesting that something similar reappeared after the flood in limited proportion. Archaeological accounts from the ancient Levant, particularly at sites such as Hebron and Bashan, mention megalithic structures traditionally associated with the existence of peoples of unusual stature. Og, king of Bashan, referenced in Deuteronomy 3 verse 11, had an iron bed 9 cubits long by 4 cubits wide, approximately 4 meters by 2 meters, according to the standard measurements of the era. And here arises one of the densest passages in all of Scripture. In 1 Peter chapter 3 verse 19, the apostle writes that Christ, after his death, went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison. These spirits, according to the continuation of the text, are specifically identified as those who were disobedient in the days of Noah while the ark was being prepared. In other words, Christ, in the interval between his death and his resurrection, made a visit to the very angels in chains. It was not a visit of salvation. Theologians broadly recognize that this proclamation was not an offer of redemption. It was a proclamation of victory. It was an announcement of confirmed sentence. Christ, descending into Tartarus, declared to the prisoners that the plan they had attempted to sabotage before the flood had been fulfilled on the cross. The seed of the woman had crushed the head of the serpent, and the resurrection that followed would seal forever the failure of the angelic rebellion. Imagine the impact of that scene. After approximately 2,500 years of silent imprisonment, these beings heard for the first time since their fall the voice of the Son of God himself pronouncing the confirmation of their total defeat. There was no dialogue. There was no negotiation. Only the announcement that the salvation they had tried to prevent had become reality. Not one angel escaped. Examine the historical development of the concept. The early fathers of the Christian Church, Justin Martyr in the 2nd century, Irenaeus of Lyon, Tertullian, and Athenagoras, all commented on these texts. For them, it was evident that the reference to chained angels in Peter and Jude connected directly to the episode of Genesis 6. Athenagoras even wrote, in his plea for the Christians, that the free demons still active in the world are, in his interpretation, the spirits of the Nephilim who perished in the flood, while the progenitor angels remain chained in darkness, awaiting the final judgment. This view, known as the Watcher interpretation, prevailed in most of the ancient church. It was only from the 4th century onward, with Augustine's allegorical reading, that another interpretation gained traction, the one that identifies the sons of God in Genesis 6 as the pious descendants of Seth, not angels. But even that alternative reading never eliminated the direct weight of Peter and Jude. The chained angels remain there, explicitly mentioned, demanding explanation. And examining the linguistic details of the biblical text, one perceives that Peter and Jude wrote with a factual certainty incompatible with purely symbolic interpretation. They asserted. They did not suggest. They located. They did not generalize. These angels are in a specific place, in a specific condition, awaiting a specific event. Examine the nature of the chains. The Greek word seiraiz implies real shackles, instruments of restraint. But how does one bind a spiritual being? Ancient theologians speculated that these chains were not physical metal, but restrictions imposed by the sovereign will of God Himself. Spiritual shackles, divinely established limits that entirely prevent the exercise of angelic power, of movement, of action. It would be as if God had constructed a cell whose walls are made of His own authority, and no created being, however powerful, could break through those walls. Put this in comparison with human reality. The angelic capacity described in Scripture far surpasses any human or animal physical force. A single angel, according to 2 Kings, chapter 19, verse 35, struck down 185,000 Assyrian soldiers in a single night. Imagine what 200 angels of comparable power could do if free in the world. And now consider that these beings are completely neutralized for millennia, without any possibility of action whatsoever. That is the level of divine power being exercised over them. Months. The duration of the flood, according to the record of Genesis 7 and 8, was approximately 1 year and 10 days. During that time, the humanity that had been corrupted by the influence of the Watchers was entirely destroyed, with the exception of Noah's family. 8 people survived, only 8, from a population estimated in the hundreds of millions. And while the waters covered the earth, while the giant Nephilim perished, while the memory of pre-flood corruption was erased from the world of the living, the angels responsible for the tragedy were already being led to the chains of Tartarus. There was no opportunity for escape. Witness the larger theological moment. Why did God do this? Why not destroy those angels directly? The answer involves a fundamental principle of divine justice as presented in the biblical text. God reserves the final judgment for the appointed day. The fallen angelic beings, all of them free or chained, will have a moment of public judgment at the end of time. Matthew chapter 25 verse 41 describes the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. Revelation chapter 20 verses 10 through 15 describes the final judgment before the great white throne. That is the destiny of all fallen angels. And between the time of the fall and the day of final judgment, there is an intermediary period. For most fallen angels, that intermediary period involves limited activity in the world. For the Watchers of Genesis 6, the intermediary period involves absolute imprisonment. The difference in treatment reflects the gravity of the specific crime. And here, a universal principle appears, applicable to any reader. Divine justice, according to the biblical text, is discriminating. It is not uniform. It recognizes differences between transgressions. It weighs circumstances. It applies proportional measures. The angels who merely rebelled received one form of treatment. The angels who then contaminated the human lineage received another. And this judicial precision, applied by God for millennia, anticipates the precision with which the final judgment will be executed. Then comes a structural reflection on the nature of divine time. For these chained angels, millennia have already passed. And yet, on the divine scale, the final judgment continues to be described as imminent. Peter himself, in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 8, clarifies that with the Lord 1 day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as 1 day. The imprisoned watchers wait according to the divine schedule, not the human one. And for them, perhaps, the sentence is still only in its opening phase. Calculate the magnitude of the silence. Imagine remaining conscious, with death impossible, with relief impossible, with communication impossible, in the densest darkness, for dozens of centuries. That is the condition of the chained angels, according to the biblical description. There is no activity. There is no reaction. There is no influence over the material world. Only waiting. only the anticipation of the day when they will be brought before the divine throne for the definitive sentence. And this reveals something about the divine perspective on angelic sin. There was no forgiveness. There was no restoration. There was no second chance. Hebrews chapter 2 verse 16 is direct. Christ did not come to the aid of angels, but to the aid of the offspring of Abraham. Redemption was reserved for humanity. The fallen angels, according to the biblical text, are beyond the reach of that redemption, and the chained watchers are the most explicit example of that definitive exclusion. Observe the contrast with humanity. Human sinners have access to grace while they live. They can repent, they can be forgiven, they can be restored. Fallen angels, according to classical Christian doctrine, do not possess that possibility. Their choice was made once, with full knowledge, with full awareness of the consequences, and it was irreversible. And the angels chained in Tartarus represent the extreme case of that irreversibility. Consider the significance of the imprisonment within the context of divine sovereignty. God did not delegate this custody. There is no biblical record of angelic jailers responsible for the watchers. The guardianship is direct. It is exercised through the continuous intervention of God. The chains will not weaken from wear. The darkness will not dissipate by chance. The system has functioned for centuries, and it will continue functioning until the moment God Himself decides to open that prison and lead His prisoners before the final tribunal. Then comes a fundamental eschatological detail. Revelation chapter 9 describes an enigmatic scene. A star falls from heaven to earth and receives the key to the shaft of the abyss. When it opens the shaft, thick smoke rises like smoke from a great furnace. And from that smoke emerge locusts with the power of scorpions. Many ancient and modern commentators suggest that this scene describes, even if in intense prophetic symbolism, the future moment when some of the spiritual prisons will be temporarily opened. Not necessarily the chained watchers of Genesis 6, but other confined beings, released as part of the progressive final judgment. And these details show that the spiritual universe described in the Bible has geography. It has hierarchies, it has prisons, it has judicial instances. It is not chaos, it is order. An order invisible to the human eye, but operated by a divine sovereignty that records, judges, and executes with millennial precision. Understanding the crime was not enough. Now you need to grasp the full weight of the consequence. The angels chained in Tartarus are the perpetual example of what happens when beings created with elevated power decide to use that power against the divine purpose. This was not ordinary rebellion. It was an attempt to prevent the plan of salvation through the genetic and spiritual contamination of humanity, and the divine response was proportionally extreme: absolute imprisonment, total darkness, reserved for the final judgment. The biblical text does not provide this detail to terrify. It provides it to clarify, to show that cosmic order exists, to show that sin, even on an angelic scale, has measurable consequences, and to show that the final judgment, far from being rhetorical invention, is connected to concrete cases already partially resolved, with real prisoners awaiting their hearing. And arriving at this point, the connection with Christ emerges with documentary clarity. Peter and Jude mentioned the chained angels not as a theological curiosity, but as a warning. Peter continues his argument in 2 Peter chapter 2, demonstrating how the fate of the watchers serves as an example of what awaits the false teachers of his time. Jude makes the same connection, linking the rebellious angels to Sodom and Gomorrah, showing that God maintains a track record of exemplary judgments that point toward the final reckoning. Christ, in his descent into the realm of the dead as described by Peter, validated this system. He announced to the most ancient prisoners in spiritual history that the redemption plan they had tried to abort had been completed. There was no pardon. There was confirmation of sentence, and that confirmation extends to all who throughout history chose to align themselves with rebellion rather than with the redemption that was offered. The story of the chained angels closes with what is still to come. These beings remain in silence, in darkness, in chains for millennia. They await a day no human being has yet seen arrive. When that day comes, according to the biblical text, they will be brought before the throne and judged publicly, together with all angelic and human rebellion. And that event will mark the definitive close of the age of sin in the created universe. What those 200 angelic souls, according to the tradition preserved in Enoch and echoed by Peter and Jude, did not foresee when they descended upon pre-flood humanity was that their transgression would become the most explicit reference in the New Testament to the precision of divine judgment. They acted thinking of power, of dominion, of pleasure. They received in return millennia of absolute silence, waiting for a final sentence whose date remains reserved in the sovereignty of God. And their silence today is the most ancient testimony that the final judgment is not religious fantasy. It is the continuation of a divine process that has already begun, that already has prisoners, that already has sentences partially served, and that only awaits the appointed day to be completed. Most people will never hear this story in a Sunday sermon, but it is there, inscribed in just 2 verses, written with words so precise that they have crossed 20 centuries without losing their exactness. The chained angels remain where they were placed, and the universe continues turning around, the promise that no rebellion will escape the final tribunal.